Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here in Oxford and also presenting to the MedCom networking events TV channel as well. So let's move on with no further ado. Who am I? Is the first question that most people ask when you stand up and make a presentation of this nature. My name is Andrew Winterburn. I am one of the directors of a consultancy called 360 Event Consulting. And I've got lots of experience, as you can tell on the slide here. 25 years specialising in the healthcare sector around the meetings and events space in particular. Managed thousands of projects across the life cycle of a product, both internally and externally facing as well. And I've managed a programme of series of events for different global pharmaceutical companies to a value of over 30 million. And I've seen a lot of changes over those years in terms of how medical meetings are presented, the content that goes around them and the delivery tools that we're using in the marketplace today compared to when I started all those many years ago, when I probably had hair at that time as well. I've worked across all time zones globally for different companies in different markets and different market sectors as well. My role now has changed significantly as I moved into the consultancy world about 12 months ago, and this is primarily around looking at the changes in the healthcare environment and the events sector in particular, and how we are actually delivering compliant healthcare events, and what does that mean to the industry in the future as well. Who are 360 Event Consulting? They are a specialist agency that work across three channels really. The first channel is the consultancy piece. It's where we come in and work alongside different corporate clients, agencies and venues in providing healthcare consultancy work, taking a deep dive into what their requirements are and the impact of the changes in compliance and the regulatory framework that people work within, but also the trends and what's happening in the industry and the sector per se. The other part of our solution is around training, and this is very much built around training for compliance. As people know in the sector, compliance is very much driving a lot of the medical education content, the infrastructure around the healthcare industry, and a number of agencies need to be trained in terms of what the compliance is, whether that's the ABPI code in the UK, whether that's FPA in Europe, or whether that's the pharma code globally. There's a real need in terms of the training and the compliance needs for agencies, whether that's venues, whether that's agencies, medical communication companies, and also large corporate agencies as well, or large corporate companies. And the last piece of our solution is very much around healthcare venues. And what does that mean? Well, that's very much about assessing venues for their appropriateness. I can't speak. I'll go back slightly. It's about assessing venues for their appropriateness of holding externally facing healthcare meetings. And we grade those venues in a traffic light system in terms of red, amber and green around their appropriateness around their capabilities to be able to deliver externally facing healthcare events. This is a European global solution, and there's a number of different venues across the UK and Europe that are actually on the platform, and we'd recommend you to go and have a look at those venues when you're starting to source your venues in the future as well. So the objectives of this session with you today are very much around understanding the strategies and tactics to create client solutions and the competitive advantage in a compliant environment. What does that mean, you say? Well, the compliance environment has changed significantly over the last few years. And for us, how does that fit into meetings and events, and how is that delivered in terms of medical education meetings in particular, and how does that impact around both corporate clients in terms of the healthcare sector and the life sciences arena, but also the agencies that are working alongside those clients. So what we're looking at is how we work across those different channels, and how compliance historically was seen as a blocker, as a restrictive factor in terms of how these meetings and events are being delivered, whereas now we are actually advocating that they are enablers. And it's the approach that we're looking at today is actually how can compliance help to create the framework for delivering very successful medical education meetings and events in the future as well. So to touch on that, the global compliance overview has changed quite dramatically over the last few years, mainly around the fact that they're being more enforced within the environment, the business environment that we're working in. So every country does have a code of conduct in terms of compliance codes that we work within, whether that's the ABPI in the UK, which we just touched on, or Lean in France, or other codes across Europe, but also the FPA code, which is underlying all the codes in the European markets, across to the pharma code in the pharma code in America, but also when you start to look at Asia, South America, they all have their own codes that they have to comply to and they have to actually work to. So that environment is something which is very important for every meeting, every event that's being organised, and where those codes are applied and how they're applied mean that we need to take those into consideration when we're looking at medical education meetings now and in the future as well. Transparency is a big part of the industry now in terms of the relationship between a healthcare professional and the industry. And transparency is a key word in terms of that relationship. What does that mean? We're capturing the transfer of value and reporting that transfer of value in terms of the spends and those interactions between healthcare professionals. But it's also about the relationship in the way that contracts are being set up, the way that medical education information is being delivered, and also the way that consultancy services are being provided by healthcare professionals, whether that's with the prescribed drugs, scientific equipment, or other areas of the industry and the sector per se as well. And then business ethics is very much a driver that is delivering best practice. So business ethics, a lot of companies have spent a lot of time looking at how they're engaging with healthcare professionals, healthcare organisations, in terms of that relationship and the standards and the protocols that they're working to, but also the professional reputation and relationship in that sector as well. One person said, the conductor from the London Symphony Orchestra, the road to success and the road to failure are almost exactly the same. And nothing can be further from the truth in terms of what we're looking at within the healthcare sector. There is a very fine line between doing something very, very well and doing something where you actually have wider implications, particularly if you're not following the code and putting the framework around this in terms of delivering of the events and the communication channels that you're using. And so we see that space as a very important space, whether you're a medical communications company, an agency working in the medical education events in terms of the logistical delivery of them, or a corporate client. We need to make sure that the code and the compliance code is the framework that we're working in, but it's also an enabler to deliver high quality science, high quality content, and the different aspects required to delivering highly scientific medical education programs for HCOs and HCPs of the future as well. So what does compliance successes look like? I think what I'd probably like to say at this stage is there's a lot of research that's been undertaken recently in terms of the relationship and the educational needs of healthcare professionals. Some of these surveys have been undertaken by industry, some of them have been undertaken by external agencies, whether they're medical communication companies or whether they're agencies working in the meetings and event space. And there's a number of trends that are starting to show in terms of how compliance is impacting around medical education meetings and the needs of healthcare professionals. And it's looking very much at that blended learning journey for a healthcare professional and the different touch points that they want to experience and the different channels that they will go to get their medical education information in the future as well. So compliance success, it underpins all those interactions, whether it is a face-to-face meeting, whether it's an online solution, or whether it's other interactions that healthcare professionals and healthcare organisations are having with the industry, then it's an integral part of everything that is happening within our industry at the moment. So we see compliance as an opportunity. It is very much about creating people who are experts in the space and looking at how the compliance and the code can help to deliver the content, the scientific educational processes that people need to be able to understand the programs that are being put in place. But also driving best practice in the sector as well. So it's about innovation, it's looking at what tools are available to people to be able to deliver these kind of meetings, and it's also creating experts within your organisations to showcase that you have the right expertise, the right knowledge and the right people to be able to deliver the right content through the right channels to the right audiences as well. Recognising that there is a greater concentration of science in the programme and the content of the meetings that have been delivered, we need to think about how this is being captured from a return on objectives. So how is that scientific information being disseminated? What tools and what channels are being used to do that? How does the code underpin that communication? But also, what are we doing to create innovative environments for these meetings to take place, different range of channels of communication that are being utilised, and also what is the learnings that have been taken away from the programmes that have been developed and implemented for different healthcare clients through different channels within the environment that the educational environment that we're interacting with global and healthcare industry clients as well. And I think the key part to this as well is very much around demonstrating that you as an agency, whether it's a medical communications agency or agencies that are working with the healthcare industry, that you are that safe pair of hands. So you understand the code, you understand the needs of the healthcare professional, you recognise the framework that you're working within, but also recognising the needs of those healthcare professionals as well. So what are their challenges? How do you deliver the content? What is the length of the programme? How are those scientific messages being disseminated? And what does that mean in terms of the events programme and the meetings that have been designed and created to help deliver those different elements to ensure that those educational objectives are being met and being delivered against as well. Another smart man, a lot smarter than I am, said the only real mistake is the one from which we learn nothing. And I think in the healthcare space, there's been lots of learnings over the years and lots of examples of that when you look at breaches of the code and the way that people have interpreted the code and actually set meetings and events up around that as well. So when you're looking at mistakes and learnings, a great place to go is actually use the code as your base, as your knowledge base, and some of the breaches of the code that may have taken place as well. So don't learn from your own mistakes, actually learn from the mistakes that other people may have made as well, which I think is a good place to go, and it will give you a good foundation in terms of to build your framework on when you're looking at the compliance meetings and events that you're organising. But learning comes from experience as well. And the more you do, the more people are trained, the more expertise you have within your business, that really helps to drive best practice and quality of content, scientific content, and the way that that's been delivered to healthcare professionals as well as healthcare organisations as well. And what are the compliance failures? You probably said these yourselves over the years when you've actually looked at, when you looked at compliance and the way that some people will tend to avoid some of these conversations and discussions that you're having with clients, it's not my responsibility, it's the client's responsibility. I've heard that on a number of occasions when I've been talking with agencies and with different people in the industry. We just do what the clients tell us. Well, actually, if we are experts in our space and we're helping to drive best practice and delivering the code and compliance and putting it in the right framework, we need to be the experts in that area. We need to be able to guide and handhold the clients through that process. Depending on the size of the organisation and their structure, that also has a big impact in terms of that relationship you have with the clients and the way that you're delivering their medical education meetings and externally facing communications in the future as well. We handle compliance issues as they happen. Well, reactive, proactive. You can't be reactive in this space. You need to be thinking ahead. You need to make sure that everything you're doing is underpinned by the code and making sure that the delivery of that content, the messages around it, are appropriate, they're scientifically driven, and they are giving real educational value. There's a lot of data out there at the moment in terms of the relationship that healthcare professionals have with industry in particular. When you look at how many of them will go to a healthcare company's website, for example, versus go to other channels for medical education information. And so that trust and that professional integrity and that push and pull of that information is really important to make sure that all the communications that are being delivered are absolutely right and in the right context and using the right channels to be able to do that as well. You could always take the option of sort of hoping that nothing's going to happen and it's not going to be picked up as well. So, that whole well, if it's a rare situation that something could go wrong and therefore we'll ignore it. It doesn't work today. You know, if you want to be a professional organizer, a medical communications company working in the events environment, you need to make sure that everything that you're doing is underpinned by the code and you're using the right code for the right reasons of how it's being applied in terms of the different markets and different environments that you're working in. Examples of that, the pharma code in terms of the ABPI code is very different to the medtech code as well. So when you're starting to apply the code in different life sciences businesses, recognizing that there are differences and nuances of the code, whether it's a scientific equipment product and the launch of a different product versus a prescribed drug, again, it's very important to actually recognize those differences and how it's been applied and the actual implementation of that process as well. And I think we can often be complacent as well. So we'll find that we've been in the industry for 20 years. I know everything, I've seen it, I've done it, I know what the code is, I understand the code, I've lived and breathed it for the last 20 years. Well, that isn't the case now because the codes are changing, the way they're being applied is slightly different, and the expectations of our clients is that we are up to date with what the code is, how it's being applied and how it impacts on the events that we're organising on behalf of our clients, and more importantly, how those interactions are applied with healthcare professionals as well. So what does success look like when you're looking at the compliance, how it's applied across all the different events and meetings that are being organised? It's a good gauge when you're starting to put your plans together, when you're looking at your structure of your meeting, your educational programs, that you're starting to apply the code and how it's actually interpreted across all the different channels that you're working with. And the events and conferences piece is integral to that as well. So the roadmap to success, well, this is very much around the strategic approach. So create your own compliance subject matter experts or expert, depending on the size and structure of your organisation. Invest in them to make sure that they know how to use the code, how to apply it, and how it underpins all the interactions that you have as a medical communications company, an agency working with corporate clients in terms of the healthcare sector. But also making sure that you are that safe pair of hands for your clients. So recognising and understanding that the code is integral to everything that is actually happening with all those interactions externally with healthcare professionals and healthcare organisations as well. Consider how your solutions and services are treated by the code. Is everything you do appropriate? And we've touched on this right the way through the presentation. And I can't stress this enough. Don't use the code as a barrier. Use the code as the enabler to help you actually drive the content, drive best practice, drive high science, make everything that is happening in the interactions with healthcare professionals be scientifically driven, which will then ultimately benefit the HCPs, but ultimately what everybody's looking to do is actually benefit the patients and the unmet needs in a disease or therapy area as well. So that approach is really important to be able to actually drive best practice and also add value to that relationship in the events that we're delivering for healthcare clients in particular. From a tactical point of view, lots of people say they know the code, but when you actually ask them to tell you a little bit more about it or drill down into the detail around it, actually they only know a little piece of it. So make sure that your experts know the code, understand the code, and also know how to apply it in different ways, depending on the different markets and different countries that you're operating in as well. So this isn't just a UK-centric solution that we're looking at here. If you've got doctors or HCPs from different countries, the USA, Europe, etc., and they're in a different location, you need to look at all the cross-border activities and how the codes are applied in different markets as well. But also use the language of the code. It's not a scary place to be when you're looking at the code. Use the language, apply the language, and actually communicate the language to your clients, because that changes the relationship and the dynamics in terms of the way that they work with you in partnership and the way they're actually delivering scientific events and scientific content to those different audiences, and putting best practice in place as well. So that sort of wraps everything up in terms of the session, in terms of looking at the compliance successes and looking at the compliance failures. The line is very close. We need to make sure that we're actually on the right side of the line, but we're also looking at innovative ways of delivering content, that science is the driver behind everything that we're doing. There's lots of tools out there now that can help enable and deliver the messages in different channels and different communication channels as well. And enjoy the code, make it work for you, make it part of your business and integral to everything that you're doing and all your interactions with healthcare clients. So thank you very much everybody for the time today. Hopefully you found that session interesting. If you would like to get more information, our contact details are here. Please use the code, enjoy it, and let's build a world for HCPs in terms of their educational journeys as well. Thank you very much.